Do you like haggling over prices? Do you like bartering? Sometimes I just don't even want to press it if it's a good price. If it's been put quality craftsmanship into it, then I'm just like, oh, I don't even want to bother. But sometimes I remember a moment when I was super tired. One of my favorite little cities in the world, Antigua, Guatemala. It was the end of the night. I mean, this woman was just trying to make a few bucks so that she could take some food home to her family, and I just wasn't having it. Oh, it's such an embarrassing moment. I should have just said, "No, I don't want the T-shirt, but here's 20 bucks." Right? I just pushed it over the edge. One time, I was in Morocco, in Fez, Morocco, in the Medina. That's the walled capital inside. And oh man, it was so much fun. Beautiful place. I took a few pictures there. But one of these shops I went into, I wanted to get a tea set for Heather. I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted a little silver tea set. I've seen it. We've had the green tea, mint tea before. And I was just like, okay, I want to bring that home to Heather. And so I see one in a shop, right? We've got the little glasses, and we've got the silver teapot and the silver tray that it goes on. And I want that. But I don't even know where to start. I don't even know where to begin the bartering. I'm not even speaking the right language. So guess what? I had my friend with me who knew the guy. And so we didn't even have to haggle. We didn't even have to barter. I just told him I wanted the James Smith price. That was my buddy who lived there. I want the James Smith price. And the guy's like, oh, well, if you're a friend of his, here you go. You're a friend of mine. And so I'm just going to give you the best price right now. In this passage that we're looking at in Genesis chapter 18, we actually have a moment where Abraham barters with God, and it doesn't even seem like God pushes back on it. And I didn't know you could do that with God, did you? Well, maybe you can't. Maybe you can. What does prayer look like if you can kind of ask God, hey, what's going on, and maybe could you adjust your plans? That, I don't know, does that even seem reverent? Well, we're going to take a look at that today. So you can grab your Bibles, turn to Genesis chapter 18. We find ourselves in this place where Yahweh, the creator God of everything, appears to Abraham while he's on a fact-finding mission to Sodom and Gomorrah. Some famous towns, you probably know about them. So 3 divine beings appear as men to Abraham. It doesn't say Abraham saw him walking up, it's just they're there. And they have a message about the son that Sarah will bear for Abraham. Well, that's news. Also, Yahweh sticks around to talk with Abraham while the other 2 go to Sodom to meet with Lot. That's the nephew of Abraham. So let's take it up in Genesis chapter 18, verse 1 through 15. So it says, and Yahweh appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, the oaks or terebinth trees. Incidentally, trees and meeting places with God are very common, starting with Eden. And that's where God would meet with the first humans and would connect with Adam and Eve. And so that's actually a place, that's a theme running throughout. In fact, just a couple chapters later in Genesis chapter 1, verse 20 or verse 33, we find that Abraham meets with God and plants this kind of tree, a tamarisk tree. And because trees and locating the place of God are very consistently described throughout Scripture. So I think Abraham's actually at a place where he kind of expects to meet with God. Abraham's been described as a friend of God, and I think he's kind of waiting in this sanctuary space. But Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, and as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran to the tent door to meet with them and bowed himself to the earth and said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let's bring some water and let's wash your feet and let's feast. And I don't know if Sarah loved this, but go make some bread right away. And then, we're going to go kill the fatted calf. We're going to find the best food and we're going to prepare that for you. Is that okay? Is that okay? And they're like, okay, go for it. And so he's got yogurt and milk and the calf that's been prepared and sits before him, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. So who are these people? Well, it says Yahweh appears to Abraham, and then there's these two others that appear with him, but they've got bodies. That's strange, right? I thought God was invisible. You don't ever get to see him. Anybody that sees God will die. But throughout the Old Testament, we see this picture. There's the invisible Father, Ancient of Days on the throne, and then there's the visible Yahweh, the invisible and the visible Yahweh, the one who comes and stands on a rock, the one who appears in a burning bush, the one who comes and stands before you and interacts with you and eats food, right? So there's this sense of embodiment there. And in fact, a little known fact, that until about the 2nd century AD, the Jewish theologians, the rabbis, would talk about the two powers in heaven, the invisible and the visible Yahweh. Only when Jesus slotted in too well to that visible Yahweh portion, that visible one who would come and stand among us, did they back away from that and try to get back to that strict sense of there is one God and one alone, and he's the invisible God. So that's part of where we find ourselves here, is that we have a visible manifestation of Yahweh and two others who appear as men. So they said to him, verse 9, "Where's Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "She's in the tent." And Yahweh said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years, and the way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So she's not menstruating anymore. And so she laughs to herself, saying, "Okay, after I'm worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" Like, is that physical pleasure, or is that the pleasure of bearing a child, or both, right? It's just kind of like, really, this is going to be my life? I don't think so. And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old?' Is anything too hard for Yahweh? At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied it, saying, "I didn't laugh," for she was afraid. And he said, "No, you did. You did laugh." So a really amazing scene. And I'm not going to unpack it all, but it certainly is the promised son that we're talking about. That Abraham, wow, he messed up, and he said, "I'm going to get a child my own way through Hagar, the immigrant." And boy, that messed up a lot of things, right? You can go back and listen to the sermons before, or read the passages before, and we can see that caused a lot of problems because he wasn't trusting in God, that he was going to provide a son through this couple. Sarah just laughs and then lies about it, because this is just, how is this possible? But what a great lesson for us to learn. Just even if we could stop right now if we just understood this. Is anything too hard for Yahweh? No, nothing. So why do I think that it is too hard, and why do I hold back my believing loyalty? But I want us to move on, because I want us to think about how we pray, how we talk to God, and this whole concept of the barter, right? How do I get into an interaction with God that's respectful, but also changes things? That's a tough one. Genesis 18:16. "So then the men set out from there, and they looked down toward Sodom. And Abraham went with them to set them on their way." Okay, well, see you guys. "And Yahweh said, 'Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of Yahweh, by doing,'" and then he has these two words that we'll look at, "'righteousness and justice, so that Yahweh may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. Then Yahweh said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that's come to me, and if not, I will know." So Abraham is going to be a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And God's saying, you know why I chose him. You know why I chose Abraham. He's having this little discussion among the three of them. And I think Abraham's listening in. And God is saying, I want him. He needs to command his children and teach his children in his house to keep the way of Yahweh. What is the way of Yahweh? Well, there's these two words that keep coming up. And this is what's amazing. Abraham is being treated like a prophet in this, being brought into the council. You know that mode where the prophet kind of looks in and sees, oh, God's having a discussion, and he's got all of his counselors and aides around, and he's saying, like in Isaiah chapter 6, when Isaiah had a peek into the throne room, and God was saying, who's going to go for me? Who will do this thing? Who will go here? Who will go there? And Isaiah says, well, here am I. Send me. Right? Abraham is stepping into this mode of being in the council space of God. And in God's council, he's got all these different emissaries, envoys, aides, angels, right? Who will do his bidding. Like, okay, who will go and bless Hagar and Ishmael in the wilderness? Or who will come with me to go investigate the city? And like, okay, right here, I'm here. And so God uses, for the first time in Genesis, a pair of words that if you had read the Bible, read the prophets, you would see in Genesis like, oh, this is a huge theme. And that's just a little hint. The Bible's meant to be read over and over and over, so that when you pick up themes later, you then see them layered into God's message throughout. But these words that we talk about, justice and righteousness, the trouble is we don't really have a pair of English words, justice and righteousness, don't really fit it. The first word that we say justice is mishpat. Say that. Go ahead. Mishpat. And that means something like the authority to make decisions, but decisions that are made in a just way. So you have the ability to distribute justice. So this mishpat is the decisions that bring about justice. The second word, tzedakah, that we translate righteousness or right standing or right relationships, has occurred already in Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. This is where Abraham had his act of trust in God, and he went when God said, go and I'll show you. And it says it was counted to him as faithfulness or righteousness. God is saying that Abraham did right by me. He was upright in our relationship. He upheld his end of the bargain. So it's a real relational word. John Goldengay says that this is a key motif in Abraham's family life and in Israel's life, and that the prophets emphasize, is that decisions should be taken and authority exercised in a way that honors other members of the community and their mutual commitment. It means doing the right thing, doing the faithful thing. And so that's the way that Abraham will guard Yahweh's way. John Goldengay goes on and says, those principles of action are the heart of God's own way of acting in the world. It's his mode. And that's a key reason why they need to characterize the way Abraham's people act in the world. And God is saying something that Abraham is going to pick up on in here in a minute, right? He's going to say, oh, wait. You're talking all about this upholding, making decisions that are completely just, and you're talking about doing right by people. Shouldn't you do that? But Abraham's blessing, his blessing is contingent upon him being the kind of person and his household being the kind of people who make just decisions and do right by people and by God, because that's the way Yahweh is going to bring about the promises that he's spoken. He mentions one other word in here, and that's the word outcry. Outcry. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great. And so I'm going to go and see whether this outcry is correct. And there's a link between the word that we translate righteousness and outcry. Righteousness, as we mentioned, is tzedakah, and outcry is se'akah. So kind of without the D sound in there. Tzedakah and se'akah. Isaiah chapter 5 would put it this way: God looks for tzedakah, the people who are doing right by one another and by God, being faithful to one another and God. But what he sees is not tzedakah, but he sees se'akah, people crying out because of the way people treat them. So wow, if we want to be a righteous people, tzedakah or tzaddiks, if we want to be those kind of people, then we need to be on the lookout for those whose outcry, whose se'akah, is going to the Lord and do right by them. So God is saying that the outcry of the innocent of Sodom and Gomorrah is great. Like Abel's blood. Remember Cain and Abel? Cain killed Abel, and Abel's blood was crying out from the soil. This outcry is another consistent metaphor throughout the Bible. We see it as the cry out from the slaves in Egypt. Of the Exodus chapter 1, you see that their cry went up, and God heard their cry and went to check it out. So God goes to investigate this outcry, the se'akah, and determine who among this city is tzedakah, who is doing right by other people, and to make a just decision, a mishpat, to make that happen. And maybe you're thinking like me, hold up. Does God really need to go down there? Doesn't he know what's happening? Isn't that part of what we believe? He is omniscient. He knows what's going on. Does he really need to come and look, right? You were thinking that with me too, right? Like what? He knows everything. But Genesis is full of times when God is asking questions and checking things out. Where are you, Adam? Where are you? Oh God, you would know, right? Well, he's checking things out, and he did this when the Tower of Babel was taking place. Let's go check it out. Let's go do this thing in Babylon. And you can wave it off and say that it's just a metaphor, but be careful what you're missing. Oh yeah, God doesn't actually come down. He doesn't need to show up. He doesn't need to be present. He's got it from his control room. He just sends a guy. He knows people. He's got this whole council of aides who can go and do these things for him. But the description of God coming down to look makes the point that God isn't just staying up there in the heavens, in this other dimension, apart from what's happening in the world. As John Goldengay says, insulated by his omniscience and unaffected by events. God allows himself to be affected. He knows what you're going through, for instance. He sees the pain you're experiencing. He knows the turmoil in your job and your family and your neighborhood and in the nation. He gets it. And he comes to check it out. Isn't that awesome? Yahweh is not a way up there God. He's a right down here God as well. He comes close because he is utterly just. So, I mean, we're hitting some big themes today. Obviously, that is anything too hard for Yahweh to do, and that Yahweh is not just a up there God. He's a down here God as well, and he is utterly just and wants to do right by his people. He says, I'm not going to pull the trigger before I do a full investigation, because that's what a righteous person would do. That's what a just person would do. So we find ourselves in Genesis chapter 18, 22 through 23, and this is where we see the bartering happen. So the men turned from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham stood still before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing and to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? And Yahweh said, if I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Abraham answered and said, Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. And he spoke to him again and said, suppose 40 are found there. And he answered, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. And then he said, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there. He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And Abraham goes on. He says, behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. And he answered, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again, but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. Wow. Can you imagine that barter? Like I said, sometimes for me, bartering, I don't even want to engage it because the prize is not that great. I don't really care. Actually, I don't care. I'm just going to walk away. Abraham really cares. If I'm going to be a person who walks uprightly and does right by people and makes just decisions, shouldn't you do that as well? It doesn't seem right to just go down there and wipe out those people. And many people have that same concern about God. Well, why would he do this? Why would he do this thing? And his ways are inscrutable. Why don't even push him on it? But there's something about it that I think we can learn today. So stick with me here. Now, what do we know about Sodom? Sodom in Ezekiel 16, 49 and 50, we see that God is describing the sin of Sodom. She says, she and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. Wait a minute. Are we talking about America? She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They didn't help the poor and needy. They were haughty, and they did detestable things before me. So that's the summary picture of what was going on in Sodom from Ezekiel 16. And it would be just for God to bring judgment. But in another sense, because God's whole point is that he's going to bring blessing and save the nations, maybe it wouldn't be just to destroy that city. And this is the tension that we find ourselves in, one that we're not always sure what's going to win out, God's mercy or God's judgment. But they're both part of God's covenant character. And so Abraham leans in to have this discussion. And Abraham, in effect, is saying, we were talking about how to faithfully exercise authority and that being the way I'm supposed to safeguard. Well, I have a question about that. What about, and all the way down to 10 righteous? Well, it seems like there was just one that turned out to be righteous, and that was Lot. And maybe you could include his daughters. Hard to say about his wife, but we see in 2 Peter chapter 2, 6 through 8, in a if-then statement, God knows how to rescue you because even in your suffering, he can make a way through because he knows how to rescue. But he says he's talking about the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, turning them to ashes, condemning them to extinction, making them an example of what's going to happen to the ungodly. And he goes on to say, if he rescued righteous Lot, so that's a Sadiq, that's one who is upright before God. Lot, who was greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked. For as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. So that's the picture of Lot there. So when they go down to the city, and that's all chapter 19, and you can read that on your own, but we see that it was not a righteous city. There was really only one, certainly not 10 righteous in that city. And so we do see God does destroy it. He doesn't destroy a neighboring town when Lot asks for it, Zoar, but that's the situation we find ourselves in. So these are the questions I just want to ask us. Why did God allow the bartering without any pushback? It wasn't like God was saying, no, I'll see that and I'll raise you. No, it was just, okay, yep, okay, Okay. And so why does God allow that kind of bartering? And who gets to talk to him like that? Those are the things I want us to think about here. The first thing we need to realize, God really isn't negotiating. He's just letting Abraham talk him down. And second, like Moses later, Yahweh is happy to discuss his plans. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. And third, he's happy to be called on regarding his character by those who have faith in him. So call me on it. Go ahead. Talk to me about my character. And so this is what I think we can take away. 3 things about prayer. For Abraham's prayer, his prayer rehearses God's character and God's promises. He rehearses God's character and God's promises. And God isn't offended by that. My guess is he's glad we were paying attention. Yes, that is what I am like. Thank you for noticing. So we can rehearse his character and his promises and be sure that he knows about his own character and his own promises, and we can push back on that. But second, his prayer was full of respect. Full of respect. You see him talk to God as Lord. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm dust and ashes. I shouldn't even maybe be in this conversation, but since I've already started it, this is how I think your statements relate to what you said you're about to do. And he's urging God to be God, perhaps in a different way than God was currently planning to be God, because of that tension of mercy and judgment. But he was full of respect. And the third thing is, I think his prayer is within God's purpose and character, not coming from the outside, not against his purpose and character. Abraham knows about the way he's called to live. It's Yahweh's way. It's the mishpat and tzedakah, to make just decisions and uphold right relationships. And he's praying into that theme, not against it. He's showing himself to be one of these upright people by praying an upright prayer. Does that make sense? It takes one to know one. As he understands God and he becomes that person, he begins to have a righteous prayer. And something that I hesitate to tell you, but I think you need to know, because we kind of know this already, that God doesn't always answer our prayers. I know some people have said, he always answers, it's yes, no, or wait, or something like that. But there are too many instances where we realize that if you're not living a whole life before him, living before him as a person of integrity, that he's not going to answer probably most of your prayers. Without believing loyalty, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, without believing loyalty, without faith, it's impossible to please God. He who comes to God must believe that God exists and that he rewards those who diligently seek him. We also know that the prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. The person who's living an upright life, praying into God's character and his purposes, is a powerful and effective prayer. We also know that men were encouraged that if you're mistreating your wife, if you're not treating her well, your prayers will be hindered. I just want to take you through a college coursework on prayer right now, real quick. I'll just give you the headings of the classes. So here's remedial prayer. This is an 091 class. This is not even college credit yet. It's just a prayer of confession. I agree with you, God. And maybe this is where you're at. You're like, I'm not a righteous person. I don't even know if I should talk to him. I identify more with the dust and ashes than the upright decisions and living right by other people. But prayer of confession. God, I agree with you. I am a rebellious person. I've been desiring to live as if you don't exist. And so I've just confessed that. I agree with you that I have lived that way, and I want to seek you, and I want to believe that you will reward me for seeking you. That's just remedial prayer. I think God will answer that for everybody. But then there's the 101, prayer 101, and I think that's That's affirming his attributes and adoring him. So affirming attributes and adoration. That's prayer 101. This is who you are. This is who you said you are. This is who you've been to me. I adore you. I am so thankful. You've saved me. You've welcomed me into the family. And prayer 201 might be righteous requests and rejoinders. God, I believe this is right within your character. I want to see this happen in our world. Would you make that happen? How come you're not how come the wicked are prospering? That's the rejoinder. How come this is happening? But God, I trust in you. Maybe prayer 301, if we were to take that course together, we would be learning how to wrestle before God in that tension of, oh, this is what my heart wants and this is how I ache, but I want what you want. That Garden of Gethsemane moment where not my will but yours be done, and I want to wrestle that out before you so that I can see your kingdom come and your will done on earth as it is in heaven. And then prayer 401, if I could suggest that course that you take in order, right, starting with remedial all the way through, would be where Abraham ended up with intercession for others. Right? Standing in the gap for others, for saying, God, would you do this thing? Would you bless this city? Would you bless this region? Would you bless this town? I want them to be blessed, not cursed. And that's beautiful because he was realizing that is his calling. That's what he was supposed to be about. His family and his household in the way of Yahweh was to be a blessing. And so you have to ask yourselves now, have I been calling for a blessing or a curse on the nation or the city that I live in? Are you interceding for the city or for the nations of the world, or are you praying for its judgment? Have you wrestled before God saying, not my will, but yours be done? And there's an intriguing passage. We know this in Romans chapter 12, verse 19. And maybe you're familiar with this. It's a tricky one. It's talking about how to live before other people. Letting love be genuine, it says in verse 9. Abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Love one another, outdo one another. Be fervent, serving the Lord. Rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. That's a beautiful thing. But then it says in verse 14, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Okay, wow. American church, let's go, right? Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be conceited. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. This is how to be Abraham's family. This is how to be Jesus's family. Living in upright relationship, making upright decisions, doing right by one another. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink, for by doing so you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And that tricky part there is burning coals on their head. Am I supposed to be praying for the judgment of those people? And there's maybe two different metaphors that are at work here, but none of them have anything to do with cursing those other people. It might be that by doing these good works to them, you shame them. And they're like, why would you do good to me? Why would you return good for the evil? It would return them to repentance. Or maybe it's a straight out good thing that someone is going around trying to start their own fire and walking around with a bowl of coals and you help them out. But either way, it's not. Burn them, kill them. It's return blessing. So this prayer strategy, this classwork of moving us through toward blessing all the nations, is really the making of a prophet. And we see in Abraham, in just the next story, he's told us he's a prophet, one who stands in the gap. And I want you to be those kind of people who stand in the gap for your nation, who stands in the gap for the nations of the world, to make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey and walk in the way. Even a land like Sodom or the U.S., with so few committed to doing right by their neighbors and upholding the weak and disadvantaged. So few willing to disadvantage themselves to give their community the advantage. So few following the way of Jesus to give up himself even unto death, to give up his rights and privileges to bring the dead to light, to bring us out of darkness into his marvelous light. Even in a land like that where there are so few, we can be those who stand in the gap and pray that God would make a blessing happen through us.